Ani Boujou, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this Talks at Google virtual event. Nagwayabkwe, Indigenous, Indo Anishinaabe-Zuzwen. My name is Kate Stevens, and I'm a member of Batchewana First Nations of Ojibwes in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, as well as a designer on the core data team at Google. Before we get started, I want to remind the audience that we will be taking questions towards the end of this talk. So as you think of questions throughout the conversation, please be sure to add them to the live chat. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest, Dr. Anton Treuer. Dr. Treuer is Professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University and author of 19 books. His equity, education, and cultural work has put him on a path of service around the region, the nation, and the world. He has a BA from Princeton University and an MA and Ph.D. from the University of Minnesota. He is also the editor of the Oshkaabewis Native Journal, the only academic journal of Ojibwe language. And he's presented all over the US, Canada, and across the world on everything you want to know about Indians, but we're afraid to ask, as well as cultural competence and equity, strategies for addressing the achievement gap, and tribal sovereignty, history, language, and culture. Dr. Treuer, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to Talks at Google. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to everybody at Google for having me today. Kwe maji tayan niwi Ojibwe majina mietago dewin demunagu gawian wagosh indigu minawa migasi indodem azagasquaji mekag indun jiba. I think I better say something in English here too, but I rely upon people smarter, older, wiser than me who say when you meet someone new, tell them what your name is. My native name is Wagosh, it means fox. And your clan. In our tribe, we have a clan system. They're animals, birds, fish, kind of a symbol for your house and a spiritual guide. So I'm from the Eagle clan. And I come from Leech Lake, which is one of the Ojibwe reservations in northern Minnesota. I'm excited to see you all and to have a little bit of a conversation. On the screen here is an image of one of my elders, Tom Stilday. He's actually from the next res over at Red Lake. And he was the first person in our state who was named chaplain for the state Senate who was not from one of the Abrahamic religious traditions. So that was him with his pipe opening up the Senate. And he had a great sense of humor too. He said, "I'm praying for politicians. Boy, do they need it." And that was even before all the craziness we've seen the past several years. So he was pretty fun. We had him at our university to give a graduation banquet speech one time. And I'd campaigned pretty heavily to bring him in since he had a PhD in the School of Life and could speak to our language, culture, history, a relatable experience for our students. But I also had to pull him aside and say, "Tom, we have a lot of awards to hand out. You got to keep this one really short," because he was notoriously long-winded. He said, "Okay, sure." Got up there, and instead of a 10 or 15-minute talk, he spoke for about an hour and a half. He did it all in our tribal language. And then when he was all done, he said, "All you people who study Indians, study that." And he went and sat down. So I was entertained. But he had some good points. You know, most of the books written about Native people, until quite recently, have been written by non-Native people, most of whom haven't spent time in one of our communities or hardly even talk to us. They'd be looking at, you know, what did the white army officer write in his journal? Well, how's that going to get you Indigenous perspectives? And it's not just the history stuff. It's the school turnaround plan, the suicide prevention plan, the economic development plan, and so forth. This is all changing. And over the past 20 years, and really accelerating over the past 10, there are so many more Indigenous authored works and Native people who are penetrating all kinds of different fields from, you know, business and economics to making movies and everything else. So it's an exciting time. And at the same time, it's a tense time. And I think everybody's broadly aware of the stresses, you know, with regard to race relations, politics, and climate change. But maybe a little bit less aware of exactly how these things are experienced by people from highly marginalized groups. After all, you will see more movies about aliens than Native Americans. And most Americans are left to their imaginings rather than deep understandings of Native people, which is why I think it's especially timely and important to have an opportunity to have a conversation like this one. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes on me, not because that's the most important thing to know, but just to cue up our conversation. After all, nobody sees the world the way that it is. We all see the world the way that we are, and we are all different. So there's Leech Lake, epicenter of the universe. Not everybody knows, but I'm on a mission to share. These are a couple folks for my family tree. Check out this guy with a super ancient face. It was kind of ironic. He got the name John Smith later in life, although he only had his Ojibwe name, through most of his life. And that's ironic because no connection to the one from Pocahontas mythology. But he was born in the 1700s and he died in 1922. So he was very close to the record for human longevity. And he was in our area before there was any white settlement, and he was still here, after the soldiers are coming back from World War I. It's always been incredible to me to think about the changes that he saw in his lifetime. I think I got his nose, but I'm working on all those wrinkles. On the other side of the screen, Wabujig was kind of a famous warrior in our part of the world. Not anybody that most anybody else would know much about. And I didn't have the tools to talk about this when I was going to school. But as I got older, it bothered me more that I could go to school for 13 years in a row, kindergarten through grade 12, to learn whatever I needed to go be successful in the world. But none of it had anything to do with me. Although my educators were not trying to hurt me and wanted me to succeed, even if they had kind of a narrow definition of what success would look like. It was the absent narratives that were screaming at me. And what they were screaming is, you and yours aren't important, aren't relevant, don't matter. And this is a message that Native kids get consistently across America. 82% of the teachers in America are white women. Nothing wrong with being white, nothing wrong with being a woman. That's who's teaching. The majority of our students in America are students of color. And it doesn't matter, Democrats, Republicans, build a wall, don't build a wall. That's who's here. If America getting browner is the sinking of the Titanic, you hit that iceberg ages ago, rearrange the furniture all you want. But at the same time, we have this huge disconnect. And although I think anybody can and should teach anybody, and I've never met a human on planet Earth who is not my superior in some way, we all have something to teach, and we all also have something to learn. At the same time, it is very difficult for people from highly marginalized groups, and certainly this is my experience as a Native person, difficult to have my own experience validated and seen as I was going to school. I didn't have the opportunity to learn about myself, only about the rest of the world. All right, and I'm having trouble advancing slides here. Let me try this. Oh, here we go. So these are some pictures of my father, who was not Native at all. He was actually an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. And, both of his parents and two cousins made it out of Austria in 1838, and everybody else was killed in the camps. He had many different chapters in his life, and I'll just have to give you the short version of his kind of remarkable stories. But he made it to the US by age 14. At age 17, lied about his age, signed up for the US Army so he could go kill Nazis. But they sent him to the Pacific Theater, stationed in the Philippines. And, he kind of reinvented his life multiple times, but eventually made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. My mom grew up in a little village called Bena, population 400. Half of them are my cousins, in the heart of the Leech Lake Reservation. And for me, my relatives on my mom's side have been buried in that same place longer than America has been a country. And that is something that is, kind of typical in the indigenous experience, to have deep roots and connection to place. Whereas I think for most other Americans, whether it was voluntary, under duress, or involuntary, there was a disconnection from motherland and often from mother language and culture as well. So for her, things like harvesting wild rice, hunting, fishing, that was less a cool cultural pastime and more like necessary means of survival. They would pull all the kids from school during wild rice harvest season so they could help with food production. And when she went to school, she only met one professional Native person ever. And that person was the school nurse. And so she thought, well, maybe I can do that. She finished high school and went on to nursing school, got a nursing degree. And then one of her first jobs was working for our tribe, for our tribe's health program. And she thought, wow, Native people are getting pushed around. I got to do something about that. And she went on and got a law degree. And she actually became the first female Native judge in the state of Minnesota and the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And it was kind of empowering for me. I'd watch my mom go to court, and you can see her in the bottom left of your screen here. And she'd have on a suit, but also like powwow braids and Indian Health Service Coke bottle eyeglasses. And she'd be the only woman in court and the only Native in court. And I think that showed me, well, we can do stuff. And I think that, paid huge dividends for me throughout various chapters in my life. This is just some economic data on my ancestral village, and I sometimes just hesitate to even show this slide. And the reason I hesitate to show it, because obviously it says poverty, the reason is it can reinforce one of the stereotypes that a lot of people have about Natives, which is everyone living in squalor on a reservation. And there's a really great TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. The Danger of a Single Story. And in that one, among the great things she shares is that the problem with stereotypes is not so much that they are incorrect, as much as they are incomplete. And they give you one narrow single story and leave you with that to understand the experience of an entire group of people. So for example, if we wanted to study white people in America, lots of people do, by the way, but we only looked at poverty in rural white Appalachia, that wouldn't tell you everything you need to know about the white experience. It wouldn't even tell you everything you need to know about the white experience in Appalachia. Similarly, if we only looked at, wealthy white families on New York's, Upper East Side, we would not learn everything you need to know about the white experience in America. But if you study white people in America, you don't get a single story. You get many stories. You get stories in the movies about white people who are good guys or bad guys, or good guys breaking bad. There's a whole series about that. And bad guys turning good. I especially like Game of Thrones, And as a result of all of the different kinds of stories, you don't watch Psycho and think, oh my God, watch out for white people. We know it's one story. With Natives and many other marginalized groups, we mainly get stories of poverty, tragedy, and loss. 87% of the educational standards that have anything to do with Natives have something to do with before 1900, which communicates, among other things, no matter how great or horrible the teaching, communicates that we are something that happened in the past. And then it surprises people to see what contemporary Native experiences really are like. And by the way, in numerous counties across the country, tribes are not just big employers, but the biggest employers of all. So be nice to Natives. You'll probably end up working for one someday. And at the same time, about 50% of Native kids live below the poverty line. Both of those things are true. Sometimes people ask the question, well, why don't those casino Indians take care of those poor Indians? And that's like saying, why don't those white folk on New York's Upper East Side take care of those poor white folk in Appalachia? First of all, who says they're not? And because we're operating complex economic and political systems, there are all kinds of things going on. But there is a lot of effort being exerted to address anything that isn't going right in Native communities. Picture of me as a little tyke. I saw a lot of changes throughout my lifetime. When I was very young, my dad was hitting the restart button. My mother was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. And there were humble beginnings. We had a little house with no electricity or running water. We had kerosene lanterns. We'd wash up in the creek, as I'm doing here, during the summer. We had enamel wash basins in the winter, wood stove. And I never felt poor. I never had food insecurity. Those actually remain quite happy memories for me. But as I mentioned, I saw big changes. I was in about middle school by the time my mother had obtained her law degree, built a nice house for our family. Our economic profile changed. And to me, it revealed a couple of things. So one is undeniably the power of an education. Now, you can finish college and still end up working at the Starbucks. But what an education is it is a lever that improves your chances of access to opportunity, even though it doesn't guarantee you that outcome. At the same time, I'm still kind of with George Carlin. I don't know if you remember the old comedian when he said, we call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. And by that, what I think he really meant was that there are barriers out there and they are not equitably distributed by race, by gender, by sexual orientation, and a whole bunch of other things about our human identities. So, yes, it's kind of the paradox of America. We are a land of genuine opportunity and horrible oppressions, and they're all mixed up in the same place. And I think many Americans want us only to see the opportunities and only to give voice to them. And some maybe want us only to see the oppressions. And to me, we have both in ample supply. This is a picture of my crew. We have a large blended family. There are 9 kids. If any of you like children, let me know. I'm always looking for sitters. My wife's in the middle of the pile here. She's got blonde hair and blue eyes. So we joke and say she's from the Swedish American tribe, which means that somebody is getting along out there. But she's pretty interesting to talk to. She's one of the only white people I know who knows what it's like not to see another white person for weeks on end, which was not just when she was locked down in the pandemic with all of this, but also when we go to ceremonies and she's like the only white person in camp and has had to learn how to adapt to an environment where it's not just white space. And so that's not as common of an experience for white Americans, but it can be a very healthy one. This is the view off the front deck of my house. I kind of feel like Shrek. That's my swamp. Among other things that had happened, early in their journey, my parents acquired this piece of property. And it had been taken in a tax forfeiture. They got it for very little money. But it didn't look like this. When they were getting started, it looked like this, wide open farm fields. And it probably was a virgin white pine forest at some time before that had been clear cut and turned into farms. And what they did is they started planting trees. That's actually my dad on the tractor here with my brother. And they planted all of the trees in this picture here. It completely transformed the entire landscape and the ecosystem. Just a couple of people. Granted, they had a child labor force. That was me. But what a change. And I think a lot of us, when we look around at the world, we are bequeathing to our youngest generation. We tremble a little. Climate change, politics, race relations. And we look at all of that and we think, oh man, there's not a lot I can do about that. I'll try to be a decent human. I'll tell my kids to be decent humans, and I hope it's enough, but it's never quite enough. All that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems that humans have been making literally for thousands of years and move that whole mountain today. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform the entire landscape and the ecosystem. And that's what we do in education. That's what we do in social activism. That's what we do when we travel, when we seek out the opinions of people who see the world differently than us. That's even what we're doing in microcosm with a little Google talk. We're opening up an opportunity to plant seeds. It's always reciprocal. And, I am still stunned by how many people there are on planet Earth who refuse to plant a tree unless they are certain that they get to sit in its shade. But we can learn a lot from that experience. So I get to wear many hats. And as we get into questions, feel free to ask about anything, whether it's the personal or the professional, or anything else topical as well. So I'm a rare commodity in terms of Indigenous academics. I get to live in my home community. I am a speaker of our tribal language, and I officiate at a lot of our ceremonies. So I officiate at traditional funerals, naming ceremonies, life ceremonies of different kinds. And feel free to ask about the culture stuff if you're curious about that. And at the same time, we also try to produce a lot of our own food. I'm not like living totally off the grid, but here we are with the kids harvesting wild rice. We make maple syrup and sugar. We hunt, fish, gather, garden, pick berries, things like that. So I like eating the food that is not, filled with a bunch of chemicals from Monsanto. And I think the lifestyle choice keeps us active and engaged with one another in the natural world. So I love living here. Also, because of my cultural work, I'm at the service of our community, and I just have to turn down the jobs that would pay me more money to move, to Arizona or, wherever. And at the same time, that's one of the hats. I guess you could say I got one foot in a wigwam, but I got one in an ivory tower. I've, authored 20 books, and they kind of range in topics from history works to Ojibwe language pieces to broad general reader things. Like today we're talking about everything you wanted to know about Indians, but we're afraid to ask. And I think I'm going to just skip this story just to leave a little bit more time for questions. This is just kind of about some of my early educational journey, but I'll give you a couple of things that I've found helpful in developing some tools for talking about touchy topics. I think a lot of Americans are so worried about offending someone or exposing an ignorance that it stifles genuine action and even conversation about some of the most important topics of our time. And so one of the things is that, broadly in American culture, we are steeped in the culture of individualism, right? Like my individual accomplishments, my abilities, my last name, make sure I got it on my kids, my degrees, my books, that sort of thing. We're sitting here in my office, check it out. I'm good at that stuff, At the same time, I think we are also steeped in a culture of competition. How many board games where nobody wins and nobody loses? There actually are a couple, but you really got to hunt to find them. Or how many sporting activities where nobody wins and nobody loses? Yoga? They'll probably have a yoga competition soon. And, we are also highly materialistic. Like you can have the worst character, but if you got a lot of money, you're seen as a great success. And so, these things permeate us, our culture and our thinking. And in part, this is also shaped by some language and messaging in the Abrahamic religious traditions around judgment. And whether we're religious or secular, this permeates our thinking. We are so worried about being judged. And these things kind of mesh together so that if someone says, hey, there's a problem with sexism and patriarchy, then a lot of men are apt to say, wait a minute, I'm a good guy. But maybe we didn't say you're not a good guy. We're just saying that there's a pattern, a system, something that needs to be addressed. Similarly, if we say there's a problem with racism, people think if there's a problem with racism, there has to be a racist. This is the individualism. Then the fear of judgment. And we're like, wait a minute, I'm a good person. You don't know me. But maybe we're not saying you have racial animus in your heart. We're saying there's a pattern here where people of color don't get to live as long or aren't as safe in certain circumstances. And we want to address the pattern. So as an example, this kid here, Native kid, he was in the foster care system and his foster parents lived in Texas. So they signed him up for school. And as is quite common really across the Bible Belt, the public school had a requirement that all boys have a haircut above the collar. And the foster parents wrote to the school and said, well, he's a Native kid and this is an important part of their culture. We don't even have permanent placement of the kid yet. If we cut his hair, it might even be considered assault because this could emotionally traumatize him. But it's compulsory that he attend school. What do you want us to do? So the school board says, well, if you can prove that he's an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe and authenticate that this is an important part of their religion, we can petition the school board for a variance, which they did. And it makes you wonder what he's going to run into through his years in the system. The point here is simply this. It's highly unlikely that someone in the school was thinking, how can we develop rules to be mean to Native kids? They're probably thinking short hair is normal. And if all the boys have short hair, then there's nothing to tease or bully about. And this will actually be good for everybody. Or they're thinking it's Texas and we don't appropriate enough money for education and it's hot and we don't have air conditioners or whatever. But they're probably not trying to hurt this kid. But the effect of the policy was still to marginalize and do some measure of harm. And so this is what we mean when we say we need to tune in to policies, practices, procedures, and patterns. So I sometimes use this example, like if I hold up my finger and say, what is this? It might start a fight unless we clarify in what language, like in the language of body parts, that's a finger. But in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, that's up. So who's right? And of course, they're all right. It's a matter of language, context, perspective. But all too often, especially when we have tough topics, somebody's up there saying this here's a finger, not an elbow, not a toe. The rest of you, shh. And somebody's listening going, what? That's a 1, not a 2. See, they just don't understand. And we totally miss each other. But if we can look at that and see it as a finger and 1 and up and many other things that it can mean depending on the context, language, then that's really powerful. That's what it means to have multiple perspectives, to get good at it, to be multicultural. And it's great advice. If you ever want to have a friend or be in a relationship or work in a workplace with more than 2 people, you could be married to somebody for 50 years in a row and they will still take you by surprise and give you something to argue about. All right, so I'm going to queue up our everything you wanted to know about Indians, but were afraid to ask. I launched into this project and effort very much by accident. I, like a lot of kids, had finished high school and had the thought, I'm going to get out of town and never come back. And I thought naively that there was also a way to escape the brambled racial borderland of my youth. I got into Princeton University And I went there and I thought, this will be so awesome because everyone will be better educated. All the ignorance will be behind me. And I think the first person I met said, dude, are you Native? Where's your tomahawk? And I remember thinking, oh my God, the brambled racial borderland will follow me wherever I go. And nothing like, coming away from home to such a different place to make me want to go home and never leave. And as I was getting homesick, by the way, I had a great experience at Princeton, and my Princeton friends were every different kind of walk of life. We're still great friends, and we seek each other out and see each other every year. But at one point I heard there was this Comanche spiritual leader who was coming out to the New Jersey woods to run sweat lodge ceremonies. And I remember thinking, the Comanche are from Oklahoma and Texas, and what are they doing out in New Jersey, especially doing ceremonies? This could be a charlatan or a weirdo. But if it's anything like home, it'll be great. So I went and checked it out. It was probably about 4 p.m. The sun was up, beautiful day. And there were a couple of big surprises. So as I drove out to the site where the sweat lodge was going to be, surprise number one, there were about 20 people waiting for this sweat lodge experience. And number one, they were all white. Number two, they were all naked. And I remember having these mixed feelings. Like, part of me just wanted to laugh because, it's 20 naked people standing around in the woods in the broad daylight. Like, what else can you do but laugh? Part of me also wanted to run because, dang, there's 20 naked people standing around in the woods. Part of me was also getting mad. Like, dang, is that what they think we're all about? Like, get naked, dance around a fire? But being naive, I opened the car door, got out, and I was immediately folded into a tight embrace by one of these naked strangers who's now hugging me hard and saying, I'm so sorry what my people did to your people. So now, awkward, the desire to laugh, run, get mad is just growing. And I looked at this woman's face. She was an elder. There were tears welling up in her eyes. And it occurred to me that no matter how misguided she was, yes, she was misguided, that her emotive response was sincere. And if I just got mad and told her off, I might be the only Native she met, and the only one she met would be an angry Indian. If I, walked away, she'd just keep thinking what she's thinking. So I had to think fast. And I said, ma'am, could you put some clothes on? Because I would love to talk to you about all of this. And she did. And we actually had a really good talk. I think she learned a few things, but I think I did too. I've always joked with my editors, we should have named this book Lessons from a Naked Stranger in the New Jersey Woods, because it would have sold even better. But one of the things I learned is that it's really important to make safe space, to give people a meaningful answer, not just an angry rebuke. That we shouldn't just be about calling everybody out so much as about calling everybody in. And what I did is I started to save the questions. And frankly, I was raised by a Native woman who had a law degree and became a judge, and I still would have been hard pressed to explain tribal sovereignty to you coming out of high school. And so I ended up saving all the questions, is it Indian, Native American, Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nation person, or what? And nothing like not knowing what terminology to use to paralyze a conversation. The questions also range: what is tribal sovereignty? What are treaty rights? Why do Natives have casinos? Are casinos good or bad? What do you think about mascots? What do you think about Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission? What do you think about the Pope being in Canada yesterday, giving an apology to Native communities? Also, what about Dakota Access Pipeline? How about that confrontation at the Lincoln Memorial? All kinds of different things. What can we do to address racially predictable educational disparities, economic disparities? What are tribes working on? What is land back? What does that mean? What do you think of land acknowledgements? There are all kinds of questions. And so as I was saving questions, I had to hunt for the answers. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to drop this, the PowerPoint, but I will start opening up and you can start dropping your questions into the chat. And as I saved those questions and started hunting for answers, in many ways, I am still hunting. And new questions and new things happen all the time. And so what I'd like to do with our remaining time is just open it up to you to steer me in whatever direction you want. And, you know, we will never be able to exhaust the conversation, but here's Kate to kind of cue us up on some of your questions. And I'll also just avail myself to you even beyond today's talk. I'm always in touch with people on my website. I've got resources for teachers, resources on Indigenous language revitalization, all kinds of things.
Awesome. Chime Gwesh for your presentation, Dr. Treuer. I'll start off with a question from Alex. She says, I always try to refer to Native people as Native Americans or natives, but I noticed you use the term Indians in this talk. Do you feel that Indians is an acceptable term?
Hey, great question. Thanks, Alex. First of all, this is an unsettled topic, and I guess I should preface my responses by saying a couple things. One is there's no way to fit everything you need to know about anything in any one book or talk. So, you know, sometimes you'll come up with something, I'll be like, I don't know. And I'll just say, I don't know. And sometimes you'll come up with something where there's more than one right answer or different perspectives. And I'll say, oh, well, Native people argue about that all the time. And here's what I think. I got a house full of natives. I don't even know what they're thinking half the time. So I just wanted to give you those disclaimers before jumping in. This is one of those topics. So just like, you know, within the Latinx community, is it Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic? You know, there are problems with just about all of the labels. Similarly, you know, is it Black, African American? Is it okay to use people of color but not colored people? You know, there's been a label discussion ongoing, and it's been like that for us too. So, you know, I would love to see us do what they did in Canada, where there's a big national conversation, inclusive, and they came up there with First Nation. So instead of reserves, they call them First Nations. People from there are First Nations people. And that replaced the terminology Indian and Aboriginal. And what was cool is that it was a pretty inclusive and broad conversation, so everyone got behind the labels. We're nowhere near that far along in the United States. So here, yes, Native and Native American and Indigenous are generally considered politically correct. You will not get in trouble for using them, and they'll be accepted. Sometimes they can be a little clunky because you have to put in some qualifiers, because all of us humans are indigenous to somewhere. So you end up having to say North American Indigenous. And then you have to clarify, does that include Native Hawaiians or not? You know, so you end up having to use a lot of syllables, which is fine. But same thing if I say a Chicago native, is that a Native American person from Chicago? Again, a lot of syllables, or just someone born and bred. So you have to qualify. It's worth the effort because the language does matter. And obviously Christopher Columbus got lost, thought he was in China. No. Japan. No. India. Yes. Boom. And these are Indians, and it's stuck. So, you know, some people have said, hey, don't use Indian. Let's just move on from that and stick with Native, Native American, and Indigenous. But the Native community has not been 100% behind that. Some have. But the American Indian movement has doubled down on Indian. The National Congress of American Indians, which represents all of the tribes in their liaison work with the US government, also is using Indian. Whether they just didn't want to change their names and acronyms, you know, or, you know, also because the word Indian and American Indian is the terminology that's used in US government statutes and things like that. So it can speak to a sovereign status rather than a cultural group. Those are some of the reasons some people have hung on to them. For me, like for today, you probably hear me using them all somewhat interchangeably, aware of their shortcomings. All of them have shortcomings, just as a means of establishing safe space. But certainly for an organization, you know, like Google, or if you're on a parent committee for a school or whatever, I recommend that you just have that conversation. What terminology should we use with your local stakeholders? So, you know, for example, if it's a school, you talk to your native parent committee or your Indigenous advisory group. Or if it's a bigger organization like Google, you've got Indigenous affinity groups within your own staff. And so you just vet it with them and see what the preferences are. That does two things. One is it puts you in touch with your own native stakeholders, and it helps you be attentive to their views and preferences. And then the other thing it does is it gets you a get out of getting beat up around the ears card if somebody gives you heck for whatever label you pick, because you can say, well, we vetted this with our native stakeholders. We're following their advice, and we're happy to take your views to that group as we revisit the discussion on a regular basis.
Great, great. We have another question from Tina. She says, thank you for sharing your family history. I favor the European side. Oh, I lost the question. I favor the European side of my family with light eyes and hair, and I often feel not native enough. Do you hear this often, and what advice would you give?
Yes. So first of all, as is the case with every other, you know, racial group of humans, we're actually diverse and complex. You know, if you turn on a Spanish speaking soap opera, you'll see all kinds of people with blonde hair and blue eyes. So, you know, being Latinx doesn't always mean brown. You know, most of the population from the Dominican Republic, where the official language is Spanish, is Black, you know, and it's like that for us. In fact, you know, Native Americans have one of the highest rates of marriage to people outside of that racial group. So it's pretty common that there are Native people who don't look the stereotypical part. They might be white passing, look Black, might be racially ambiguous. And even, you know, like, because there's so many brown people in America, like if I cut my hair short or dress in certain ways, I can easily pass as, you know, Latin American, Filipino, or Arab, or something like that. So, you know, to me, the way I frame it is this: race is about three things. One is, it is about color. We can't get away from the way we get othered by others, and color is the first thing that shows up. So, you know, a Native person, you know, who looks white, looks Black, looks brown, you know, they will have very different racial experiences because of the way they look. But it's also partially about culture, because you can have people who look every which way, but might have a shared cultural experience or language or something like that. But it's also about consciousness. It's about how we see ourselves. So someone who doesn't look the stereotypical part might feel like they're not accepted by other people because they don't look like they stepped off the set from Dances with Wolves. And they might sometimes feel unaccepted in their own community, even though lots of Native people have a shared experience. But what I really would recommend to anyone who has Native ancestry is own it and explore it. And, you know, a third of our people have been adopted and fostered out of our communities. 50% of the enrolled Native citizenry lives off reservation. And there are all kinds of experiences and depths of connection to community, culture, and so forth. So just lean into that. It's yours, and you have a right to explore it and learn about it and live it and learn more about it. And I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people are so worried about being shamed out or judged that they inhibit themselves from leaning into the things that are just, you know, part of their birthright and who they are. And all of us should love all of the parts about all of us.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So Jennifer asks, I have an ongoing debate with my spouse on the appropriateness of Native groups as school mascots. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So first of all, I think we should actually do away with all of the human mascots. That'd be my bottom line. Not all Native people agree with me on this, and I'll give you my views and reasons. By the way, I think that's where we're going to end up too. Like the Redskins football team was like, we will never, ever, ever change our mascot ever. And then someone said, we're going to pull your funding. They're like, we will change it tomorrow. That's what's going to happen. But ultimately, I think they should. The two main arguments that people use in support of them are simply, well, we are honoring Native people, like cool, kick butt Spartans, Trojans, and Indians. But you got to bear in mind, first of all, when the hometown fans are dressing up in faux Native regalia and war paint, when these things have very special and these are special rights that people got to earn, and wearing eagle feathers is not just for show, but it means things. And so some Native people are really upset by that. But you also got to know that regardless of what the hometown fans do, the opposing fans will always defile their opponent's mascots in the name of team spirit. And so a lot of these mascots are held by schools. And so when the opposing fans are holding up signs, hey, Indians, get ready to leave in a trail of tears round 2, hi-ho-wa-ya. That stuff is inimical to the mission, which says something about education and an inclusive learning environment. And whether it's professional sports teams or school teams, sports can be something that unites us and pulls us together. By the way, they're on a range of sensitivities. Redskin, worse than Indian, worse than Warrior, worse than Blackhawks, And at the same time, I don't know if you ever listen to country music, but there's a song by Gretchen Wilson, Redneck Woman. It goes something like this. I'm a redneck woman, I ain't no high class broad, right? And it goes on from there. Does that mean I get to call every white woman I meet redneck woman? No. Might somebody be offended by it? Yes. Is there going to be somebody who won't be offended by it? Maybe. But I can't tell women, you have no right to be offended because Gretchen Wilson is down with that. So if you find a Native person, and by the way, there are some who are like, doesn't bother me at all, that's not enough. Native people have been saying, many, don't do it. And 2 tribes have sanctioned the use of their tribe's name. The Florida Seminoles said, go ahead for the college team. And the Meskwaki said, go ahead with the use of their chief's name for the Blackhawks. But over 100 tribes have passed resolutions saying, don't do it. And the National Congress of American Indians, which represents 574 federally recognized tribes, said, don't do it. So what is respect? Respect is listening and honoring that request. Really, of all the fish I have to fry, this is not my biggest battle, but it does matter. And I know it's like a special American right to be politically incorrect, but that doesn't mean that we should be intentionally abrasive all the time. And it's a separate question to say, should we legislate the changes or just do the right thing? And so far, hundreds of schools have changed them to do the right thing. And at the very least, you can also know that if you keep an Indigenous mascot, it will be controversial. Why have controversy at the middle of your sports culture? Put the controversy to rest and go with lions, tigers, and bears. Problem solved.
So true, so true. Well, now that we're done our 3rd question, I wanted to thank you again for all of your insights today and answering some of these questions. Do you have any last words for us today, Dr. Treuer?
There's so much ground to cover. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in and being part of the talk today. My website, antontreuer.com, has extra resources, free stuff. I've got a YouTube channel. There's all kinds of shorts answering all kinds of questions. There are lots of ways to get information. Many Native people who are deeply engaged in all kinds of work, writing books, giving talks, sharing information. So if you know enough to know there's something you don't know, it's time to lean in, learn some more, and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. And I'll add one other message that any Indigenous Googlers, please join the Google Aboriginal Indigenous Network or GAIN group. We would love to have you participate in more conversations like this. Dr. Treuer, Bama P, thank you until next time.
Bama P, miigwech, ngwea bikwe.
Miigwech.